I thought about, in talking about the activism that I've been part of and how to understand some of the learning through the lens of the Dharma, and taking particularly the lens of the 5 powers or 5 spiritual faculties. And these are the energies that are considered almost as equally important as the 7 factors of enlightenment, because when they're strong and mature, it's said they give the mind the strength to open and awaken, and that they protect the mind from all the hindrances. And so you could maybe guess what they are. So faith and mindfulness, concentration, wisdom, and energy. Those are the 5 faculties. And so then when I talked about faith last time, I didn't give you the definition from the Visuddhimagga. Its characteristic is trusting, and its function is to clarify settling murky water, or its function is to enter into, like setting out across a journey or water. It's manifested as non-fogginess or resolution, and it should be regarded as a hand because it takes hold of the profitable. Its purifying or aspiring characteristics are like water purifying salt thrown into the water, because the salt causes the solids and mud and water weeds to subside and makes the water clear and transparent and undisturbed, and this is what faith does. So you could say that faith discards the hindrances and causes the corruptions to subside. Thus, it becomes the conditions for upholding the precepts. So it's aspiring, as in a crowd who stands on both sides of the banks of a river filled with crocodiles. And so the crowd is afraid to cross. And a hero, heroine, or person, a courageous person we should say, crosses the river and repels the dangerous animals, and then the crowd feels their faith to follow and are led across. So faith aspires to wholesomeness and goodness, and another manifestation of it is to make a decision. We've spoken about it as confidence in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So the 5 powers are envisioned as 5 horses leading or pulling a chariot. And wisdom is paired with faith, and energy with concentration or calm, and mindfulness is the leader. Anyway, I wanted to speak about different experiences I've had with these as a particular guideline. And the first one I want to talk about is when I lived in Northampton. Many of us lesbians living there wanted to have the city vote to institute domestic partnership, where you could access healthcare and other things from having your partnership acknowledged legally. And there were so many lesbians living in Northampton, the organizing group just took it for granted that basically we just had to collect the signatures and that it would be passed. So we had a lot of faith. We had a lot of resolution to cross the river and to institute domestic partnership ordinance. And so we organized ourselves into neighborhoods, and we went gathering signatures in different neighborhoods, and we lost. And we lost because we hadn't partnered our faith with wisdom. And the definition of wisdom is to see the situation as it is, and it's like lighting a lamp on the situation to illuminate it. And we hadn't illuminated the power of the churches, particularly the Catholic Church in the area, to sway the community. That in our faith, we had just soldiered ahead without really comprehending the whole situation. And so we were like shocked. Oh my God, Northampton, with all these Smith College, the land of lesbianism. And we lost. So that was really a great learning, and we regrouped. Many of us joined the UU Church, the Unitarian Universalist Church, because it had a speakers bureau. And through the church, we were able to go and speak to other churches as another church. And so in the next 2 years, we spoke to a lot of different, affiliated groups with the different churches, and directly with congregations. We would ask ministers if we could come in and speak. And because all those churches were in Northampton, there was only one church that said no. Everyone else said yes, they would be willing to have us come in. Sometimes it was at the end of the sermon, so some people left, but we went in. And after another 2 years, we put up the ordinance again, and we won. So that was an example of having a lot of faith not balanced with wisdom and general comprehension. As you know, energy or right effort is cultivating the wholesome and abandoning the unwholesome. And the abandoning of the unwholesome is very particularly according to the 4 great attachments, letting go of sensual pleasure, of ideas and opinions, of rites and rituals, and of the sense of self. And so now I want to talk about a learning around sensual pleasure. This is what was in the early days. We, in the Albion and Mendocino area, had organized ourselves into affinity groups, and we had done this initially to stop Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant from going online. And so we had organized into affinity groups to go to the demonstration. There was a massive demonstration there. And it had been somewhat successful. So I don't know, some of you might have already gone to demonstrations within the structure of affinity groups. You always have someone who doesn't go right into the lines in case you get arrested, and you have someone who is in touch with legal representation, someone who carries first aid kits. So it's like very organized. But then later on, we went to a demonstration at Livermore to stop sending arms to Central America. And we ended up in a disarray because several people wanted to sleep with several other people in our affinity group. We were an all-lesbian affinity group. And so they had organized a place to sleep. And then there were some of us like me who wasn't partnered at the time was like, well, where am I going to sleep? But they weren't interested in like taking care of the whole affinity group, because they were mostly interested in sleeping with their new crushes. So this is this is the obstacle of political organizing, when sensual pleasure is the driving force in some of the organizing. And actually, it was such a very significant experience for me. I mean, I'd been doing a lot of political organizing around many things, and this particular time was so kind of impactful for me that I went back to my little converted chicken coop, because a lot of the work I did was political organizing, so I lived in a converted chicken coop, and in exchange for gardening, so I really lived on very little, and I said, I don't want to do this type of organizing anymore, because if we can't take care of each other, there's something wrong, and I don't know how to address it, but I want to. And I sat on the floor and I did a prayer, and I was like, I'm praying to be guided, and I painted around the prayer, and I had a little crystal from Evelyn, and I put it on my prayer, and some of you know, just 2 weeks later, someone I didn't know very well, who I was having tea with in Albion, said, oh, I went to this retreat and you should consider it. And, you know, I was still very much like a Marxist. And I said, no, I'm not interested in spirituality, because it's what's the thing? It's the opiate of the masses. But she said, I'll pay for you to go, which was just this incredible gift. And so I went, yeah. And that was the beginning of this, my whole dedication for the next 10 years, you know, just deeply dedicated to following Ruth as a groupie and deepening in my spiritual practice. It wasn't that I didn't do other things too, because now I'm going to talk about something else. Earlier on in my practice, not in my spiritual practice, I lived in San Francisco, and in the 70s, as you know, there was Prairie Fire and the Weather Underground, well, in the 60s and in the early 70s, and it felt like this was the time for a revolution. And so I was part of an underground organization called Seize the Times. And we were doing all kinds of organizing, and my best friend and I, she was straight and I was totally in love with her, we had started to work in creating a food co-op. And when the leadership of Seize the Times heard about it, they said it was too bourgeois, and they kicked us out of the organization. And so I want to name attachment to views and opinions, and how much our attachment to views and opinions, and we all have them, separates and divides us and our communities. And I'm not saying that it's easy, because we were talking about that in terms of not having enemies, how easy it is to work so that that isn't the main driving force in our community, because one of the reasons in retrospect that so much of us in those organizations failed is because there was such a hard line on what was revolutionary and what wasn't. And so even though you were like genuinely committed, if you had the wrong line, you're out of the organization. It was so heartbreaking for us to be told. And we'd been working with people. We were friends with people. We had dinner. I mean, like, we were a community. To be told that we were bourgeois and that we were out. So anyway, that was a deep teaching for me. When I moved, if you have any questions, please feel free, because this is more a dialogue than anything. When I moved to Leeds, Northampton, we had a lovely house. It was by a little creek very close to Mill River. It was gorgeous. There was land just at the back of the house that was protected because it was a watershed area. And we were just around the corner from a factory that produced silk screening and pens, the pens that smell so terrible. Sharpak, it was called. And Sharpak was emitting these just terrible smells, like really awful smells, so that sometimes you had to like just close all your windows and you couldn't go outside in the garden. And it was the only employer in our little town. So I knew that I couldn't like confront it head on. Opposite the house I was living in was a supervisor, old guy, and we would talk when I was walking up and down the roads. And one day he invited me over to his place. We got really friendly. And he said, I wish you're the right sort of person to start the Leeds Civic Association. And I was like, this is it. This is my path. I started organizing block parties, and I don't know if you ever have. Like, they're a big deal. You have to get permission from the city planning department. You have to get permission from the police to block off the roads, and you have to do all these things, and so on and so forth. And I was into it, and I got together with some people who were in the area, and we organized block parties for many years. And the local people loved bluegrass and country music, which I hate, but we all hired those bands, and we served hot dogs and hamburgers with white buns. I mean, just like building the environment to meet people in the community and to build friendships. So I was the vice president of the Leeds Civic Association and organized all these different sort of local city things. And after 2 years, I felt like we were in a strong enough position, and a subcommittee to begin to see what we could do about the volatile organic compounds in the air. And so the first thing we went to the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and they said, oh, sorry, when we went down there, this person who's, in charge of this isn't here. For 6 times, we would organize meeting the person in charge of our area, and they weren't there. And finally, someone took pity on us and said, oh no, the EPA is investigating Sharpak, so we can't give you any information on it. Which actually wasn't legal, but that's what they said. So in the meantime, we spent a lot of time reading up on volatile organic compounds that would come from this. And so faith in one step after another in long-term organizing. Mindfulness in paying attention to what was going on in the community and how far to push, because half the community had family employed in the factory, and so we couldn't alienate them. So going slowly on that. And energy in sustaining the energy of study, going to the EPA and just reaching out over and over again to find out someone who could help us. Finally, someone came to the block party who used to work for the EPA in Springfield, which was the nearest big town. And he said he was willing to help us. Because we were a local community, we asked the owner if we could have a tour of the facility, because we were in the community and wanted to know what was going on. And we brought this guy along. And so we were given a tour, and he saw the temperature gauge of the incinerator, and he knew they weren't using enough of the catalytic converter to burn all the off-gassing, which is why the smells were so terrible. And so we got it. We got what was exactly happening. So that we went back to the EPA and said, we know what's going on. You have to do something about it. We went to the newspapers, and they were really interested because now we had all the information and we had enough of the community behind us. So finally, the EPA fined Sharpak and insisted they buy the catalytic converter, which was $80,000, and they hadn't wanted to buy it. So that is how that was one of the victories for clean air in my community. Some of the people that were more antagonistic to what was happening, I invited to my birthday party. This was my 50th birthday party. So my sisters came from Canada and my other sister from Oakland. And then, of course, my partner and her family were there. And then all the sort of lesbians from the community were there. So these people were like, what is this? We were sitting in a circle and like doing sharing, and they were like, what is this? But it was amazing because it was so intimate and friendly. Even though they were so resistant, they never actually organized to stop us. And so that thing, that guideline of no one is an enemy, and how do we hold that in our communities? That was one of the more successful strategies in organizing. I have to say, in the one about the Domestic Partnership Act, I'd gone to my next door neighbor, who I'd really built quite a friendship with. We shared gardening together, we had tea in the afternoon together, and she refused to sign it. And it was really hard for me to continue that friendship. So just to say, I had to work really hard to be open to her. So that was a success for at Sharpak. When we organized around Diablo Canyon, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission even though Diablo they found was built on a fault and there was something wrong with their design, gave them permission to go ahead. And so they went online in 1984. And that decision was really a condition for a lot of doubt for some of us. Like, we had done so much work to try and stop that from happening. And it continued to happen. And then there were other things happening on the coast. The Navy wanted to dump radioactive waste off the Mendocino coast in concrete garbage containers with concrete around it. So we were organizing around that. But I really got to experience doubt as a hindrance, like the ways that it sort of stripped us of energy and of being able to make any decision or being able to discern, that there was a path ahead. It felt like we'd really lost. And it just felt like we became very indecisive and wavered. It was like doubt. We were filled with doubt. And now I'm so much clearer about doubt as a hindrance. And the Buddha said that doubt is one of the greatest hindrances to our freedom, because it stops us on the path and is manifested as indecisiveness, wavering, and fogginess. It doesn't allow us to see the path. And it actually took a group called, what was it called? Abalone. Abalone something or other, where there was a group that used that name because in the first flush at Diablo, they killed hundreds of thousands of abalone. After that, there was, I don't know if any of you live on the Mendocino coast and had access to abalone, but it was like, that was the end of abalone. It was like so heartbreaking. So anyway, it was a great teaching for me about how when we perceive what we want to change as monolithic, as insurmountable and not workable, that we think that is a true perception when in fact it's just doubt. Because there's always a path. There is always a path. There's always the capacity to regroup. And we did regroup, actually, and continued. But for a couple of years we didn't. And so just to name doubt as a hindrance in our social justice work. So maybe that's enough of that